My name is Delaney Moore. I'm 32, and if you told me when I was little that my parents would one day sue me over a house I bought with my own savings, I'd have laughed in your face. Not because my family was perfect, we weren't, but because I truly believed that if I worked hard and stayed responsible, they'd always be in my corner. I grew up in a modest, tree-lined neighborhood just outside Eugene, Oregon, where my parents, Harold and Elaine, prided themselves on raising well-rounded kids. At least, that's what they told their friends. But the reality inside our beige split-level home told a different story. I was the firstborn, the planner, the quiet achiever. My brother Grayson, 4 years younger, was the dreamer, the free spirit, as my mother often put it, usually after bailing him out of some impulsive disaster. Even as a child, the contrast between us was obvious. I kept a chore chart taped to the back of my bedroom door and color-coded my school folders. Grayson, meanwhile, once tried to sell my goldfish to a neighbor for bubblegum, and then cried when I made him give it back. At the time, we laughed it off. Boys will be boys, my dad said. But that pattern never changed, it just evolved. While I took babysitting gigs in middle school to save up for a laptop, Grayson got a skateboard, broke it within a week, and somehow ended up with a new one the next day, courtesy of Mom. When I got straight A's, my parents smiled and said, "We're proud of you, Delaney, but we know you've got it under control." When Grayson passed algebra by the skin of his teeth, they threw him a pizza party. I didn't resent him, not at first. I thought it was just the way families worked. But that belief began to crack in high school. I was volunteering at the animal shelter, tutoring underclassmen, and stacking shelves at a local pharmacy on weekends to save for college. Grayson bounced between hobbies, photography 1 month, DJing the next, and coasted through school on charm and excuses. My parents were always in his corner, hiring tutors, going to meetings, begging teachers for second chances. It became painfully clear. I was the dependable one, the one they never worried about. And because they didn't worry, they didn't help. The bar for Grayson was low and padded. Mine was high and lonely. They saw him as someone they needed to carry. And me? Someone they could lean on. I didn't complain, I was used to holding everything together. But deep down, I hoped that one day, all my quiet sacrifices would be recognized, that my achievements would mean something, that when I finally reached a milestone, they'd celebrate me the way they always did for him. I didn't know then that the very thing I worked so hard for, a home of my own, would one day become the reason they turned against me. In my early 20s, while most people were figuring out what they wanted to do with their lives, I already knew exactly what I was working toward. I didn't just want a career. I wanted stability, autonomy, and a place to call my own. While my friends posted filtered photos of beach trips and music festivals, I was clocking hours at the veterinary clinic, treating sick animals during the day, and picking up late-night emergency shifts at the 24-hour animal hospital across town. It wasn't glamorous. I smelled like antiseptic more often than not. My scrubs were always one pet hair away from looking like a shag carpet. But I loved it. And more importantly, it was mine, my path, my effort, my progress. Every paycheck got divided into 3 categories in my budgeting app: essentials, student loans, and the dream fund. That dream? A home. Not a sprawling mansion or a trendy high-rise, just a solid, quiet place with enough sunlight for plants, a fenced yard for a future dog, and maybe a reading nook with a window seat if I was lucky. I lived frugally. My apartment was a shoebox with creaky floors and a temperamental heater, and I furnished it with curbside finds and Craigslist bargains. While Grayson rotated between our parents' basement and whatever couch his latest business venture had landed him on, I saved every bonus and tax return. I didn't go out much. Couldn't afford to. Really. But I never saw it as a sacrifice. It felt like an investment. For over a decade, I watched interest rates, researched real estate trends, and bookmarked open houses I couldn't yet attend. I even attended a first-time homeowner seminar on my only weekend off that year. When I finally got pre-approved for a mortgage at 31, I cried in my car outside the bank. Not because it was emotional, although it was, but because it had taken me 12 years of effort to get there, and I'd done it alone. The search took another 10 months. I saw houses with cracked foundations, leaky basements, and more avocado green bathrooms than I thought possible. Just when I began to think the right place didn't exist, I found it, a modest, craftsman-style house tucked in a quiet neighborhood on the east side of Portland. 3 bedrooms, original hardwood floors under decades-old carpet, a charming porch swing that needed only a coat of paint, and best of all, a backyard shaded by a towering dogwood tree, the kind that blooms bright pink every spring. It needed updates, sure. The kitchen cabinets were straight out of a 1994 catalog, and the bathroom fixtures belonged in a time capsule, but I saw potential. It had good bones, and it felt right, like it was waiting for someone to care about it again. I put in an offer that same week. The sellers, an older couple downsizing to a condo, accepted after a bit of back and forth, and just like that, I was under contract. The day I signed the closing documents, I walked through the empty house alone, my footsteps echoing in the bare rooms. I remember standing in the middle of what would become my living room, sunlight streaming through the south-facing windows and letting the quiet wash over me. It wasn't just a structure with walls and a roof. It was proof. Proof that working hard and doing things the right way wasn't pointless. Proof that my sacrifices had led somewhere real. I didn't have a partner to share the moment with, no proud parents waiting outside with flowers or champagne. But for the first time in a long while, that didn't sting. I had done this for myself. And that was enough. Still, a part of me wanted to believe my parents would be proud. Maybe even surprised in a good way. They'd always been more vocal about Grayson's messy attempts than my quiet progress. But this was big. Surely this was something they couldn't ignore. I called them that evening after moving my folding chair into the living room, the only piece of furniture in the house at the time, and told them the news. I closed today. I bought my first house, I said, unable to hide the excitement in my voice. There was a pause. Then my mom responded, "Oh, you went through with it?" The flatness in her tone knocked the wind out of me. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile that no one could see. "It's official." Dad got on the phone next, his voice filled with questions that sounded less like curiosity and more like scrutiny. "What's the square footage? How's the plumbing? Did you get an inspection?" I answered each one calmly, though something about the conversation felt off, like I was being evaluated instead of celebrated. When I told them it had 3 bedrooms, my mom's voice sharpened. 3? That's a lot of space for just you, isn't it? I paused before answering. "One for me, one for a home office, and 1 guest room," I explained. I figured it was a smart move long term. She didn't respond right away, but I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head. Wanting to keep things positive, I invited them over for dinner the following weekend. "Come see the place," I offered. "I'd love to show you around." My mom hesitated, then said, "Sure. We'll bring Grayson too." That should have been my first red flag. I spent the next few days prepping like it was a holiday. I borrowed a folding table and chairs from a coworker, unpacked enough kitchen items to cook a proper meal, and even bought a bottle of sparkling cider to toast the occasion. I printed a "Home Sweet Home" sign and taped it near the entryway, cheesy as it was. When they arrived that Sunday evening on time, as always, they stepped inside and immediately started assessing. Mom ran her fingers across the counters, muttering, "These'll need updating." Dad peered into the backyard and commented, "Hope you're ready for all that yard work." Grayson drifted through the house silently, a strange expression on his face, until he finally said, "So, you've got 3 bedrooms all to yourself?" His voice had an edge to it I couldn't place. I tried to laugh it off, said something about having space for guests or maybe a future dog. Dinner was stiff. I asked about their garden, Grayson's latest hobbies, tried to keep things light. But halfway through, Dad cleared his throat and dropped the bomb. "Delaney, we need to talk about something regarding this house." The way he said it made me set down my fork. My mom reached across the table and took my hand. "Honey," she said gently, "we've been talking, and we feel this decision. It wasn't entirely fair." Confused, I asked what they meant. "We always assumed," Dad added, "that you'd involve the family when making a big purchase like this. Especially considering Grayson's situation." My stomach sank. "What situation?" I asked. though I already knew. Mom sighed. He's still trying to find his path. And you have all this space. My chest tightened. Are you saying you expected me to let Grayson live here? Silence. Then Dad replied. Not just live here. Co-own. We thought you might put the house in both your names. I blinked, stunned. You want me to sign over part of my house to Grayson? Grayson, who had never held a job longer than 6 months. Grayson, who was 28 and still living rent-free in their basement. Grayson, who'd contributed nothing to this milestone. That's not fair. Grayson snapped suddenly. You have everything. I have nothing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Because I worked for it, I said quietly. Every shift, every sacrifice, every choice I made for over a decade was to get here. You're being selfish, my mom said, her voice trembling. Family shares, Delaney? I looked around the room, the table I borrowed, the chairs I didn't own, the house I had built with blood and budgeting, and realized they didn't see me at all. Just what I could provide. That night, after they left in a cloud of disappointment, I sat alone in my empty living room and cried not because they were angry, but because they weren't proud. Because even after everything, I still wanted them to be. And now, I finally understood. I had built this house on my own, but it would never be enough for the people who expected me to hand it away. The Sunday after I moved into my new home was supposed to be a celebration. I had imagined laughter echoing in the kitchen, my mom admiring the hardwood floors, my dad asking about the insulation and property taxes in that pragmatic way of his, and Grayson maybe even for once saying he was proud of me. I knew better than to expect a parade, but I thought I'd at least get a hug, a smile, maybe a genuine, well done. I had worked so hard for this, for the right to unlock my own front door, flick on my own light switch, and sit on my own porch with a cup of coffee I'd earned. I had envisioned that dinner as the beginning of something warm, a shift in our family dynamic where they could finally see me not as the safe bet or the one who doesn't need anything, but as a person with dreams, needs, and a life worthy of recognition. Instead, it was the night everything cracked wide open. I spent all day preparing. I borrowed a card table and 4 collapsible chairs from my coworker Carla, lit a vanilla candle to mask the smell of fresh paint, and cooked a simple pasta dish with roasted vegetables and garlic bread. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I even picked up a bottle of sparkling cider, imagining a tiny, cork-popping moment of celebration. I stood in the doorway waiting for them, nervously straightening the "Home Sweet Home" sign I'd taped above the entryway. When they arrived precisely on time, of course they stepped inside without much fanfare. My mom handed me a Tupperware container of lemon bars and glanced around like a realtor appraising a mid-range property. Smells like fresh paint, she remarked, setting the container down on the counter. You did this yourself? Yeah, I smiled. Took me all weekend. It's bright, she said, her tone neutral. Dad wandered through the house silently, occasionally grunting. Grayson trailed behind, eyes scanning every corner without saying much. I gave them the tour, trying to highlight the good bones of the place, the original woodwork, the little built-in bookshelves, the potential for a garden out back. My dad peered out the sliding glass door. That yard's going to be a lot of work, he said flatly. Good luck with that. My mom ran her fingers along the countertop. You'll want to replace these, she added. They're very dated. And Grayson, he paused in the smallest bedroom and muttered, must be nice, having all this space to yourself. We sat down to eat in a half-furnished dining room with borrowed chairs and paper napkins. I tried to steer the conversation towards safe territory. How's the garden doing? I asked Mom. Have you decided whether to plant lavender again? She shrugged. We haven't gotten around to it. I turned to Grayson. Still interested in that crypto project you mentioned last time? He rolled his eyes. It tanked, he said bitterly, like everything else. I offered a small nod of sympathy. That sucks. Sorry to hear it. There was a strange tension in the air, like they were all waiting for something. I pushed through it, talking about how I planned to refinish the cabinets, maybe replace the light fixtures once I could afford it. It's not perfect, I admitted, but it's mine. That's when my dad set his fork down and cleared his throat. Delaney, your mother and I wanted to talk to you about something. About the house. I paused. suddenly alert. What about it? He glanced at my mother, who nodded slightly, like they'd rehearsed this moment. We're concerned, he began, about the timing, and frankly the selfishness of the decision. He blinked. Selfishness? My mom reached across the table, patting my hand in that condescending way she always did when delivering bad news. Honey, we just assumed that since you're so good with money, so careful and prepared, that you would use this opportunity to help Grayson too. My stomach dropped. What do you mean, help him? I asked, even though I already knew. Well, she said, carefully choosing her words. Your brother is in a difficult place. He's still trying to find his path. And this house is quite large for just one person. We thought maybe you could have included him in the purchase, or even put the house in both your names. I felt my jaw tighten. You expected me to give Grayson part ownership of a house I saved over a decade to afford? Not give, my father corrected, as if that made a difference. Share, as family. Family supports each other. I've always supported him, I replied, my voice steady but sharp. I've helped him with resumes, offered to co-sign his lease, even paid his cell bill a few years ago. But this is different. Grayson finally spoke, his voice rising. You don't understand what it's like. You have everything. A good job, no debt, a freaking house, and I'm out here barely scraping by. You're not out here, I reminded him. You're in Mom and Dad's basement, with zero rent, and you've quit every job you've ever had. Not everyone wants to be a wage slave, he snapped. Not everyone fits into the little mold you love so much. I don't love the mold, I said. I just live in the real world where bills need paying and houses don't buy themselves. My mom's tone turned icy. Delaney, we're not asking you to hand over the deed. Just consider cohabitating. Grayson could live here, contribute when he's able, and it would give him the stability he needs to find his footing. And in the meantime? I asked. While he's finding his footing, who's paying the mortgage, utilities, taxes? No one answered. I already knew the answer. I was. You're being cruel, my father said suddenly. Grayson has talents. He's just misunderstood. Not everyone is built for spreadsheets and budgets. I let out a humorless laugh. You think being responsible is easy? It takes sacrifice. It takes showing up day after day when no one's applauding. While Grayson chased one dead-end idea after another, I was working double shifts. While you were paying off his credit card debt, I was packing lunch every day to save money. Tears welled in Grayson's eyes. You've always thought you were better than me, just because you're boring and predictable and know how to suck up to bosses. I've never thought I was better than you, I said. I just think I've made choices, and those choices came with consequences, good and bad. I didn't get here by luck. And I won't give up everything I've worked for because you don't like the path you chose. My mom's voice trembled. So you're really going to be this selfish? You're going to hoard all this space and leave your brother struggling? It's not selfish to keep what I earned, I said, quietly but firmly. What's selfish is expecting someone else to bail you out of a life you refuse to take responsibility for. No one spoke for a long moment. Then my dad pushed his plate away. I thought we raised you to value family. Clearly, we failed. I didn't cry until they were gone. After they left, Grayson slamming the front door behind him like a petulant child, I just sat there in the echo of their disappointment. The food had gone cold. The champagne bottle remained unopened. The house felt colder than before, as if the warmth I'd poured into making it a home had been sucked out in the span of a single dinner. I stood at the sink washing plates I couldn't eat off of, trying to scrub away the guilt and rage clinging to me like grease. I had imagined that night would mark a new beginning. In some twisted way it had, but not the kind I ever wanted. It was the night I realized my family didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as a provider, and worse, an obstacle. And they weren't finished. Not even close. After that disastrous dinner, something inside me changed. I couldn't unhear the words. Couldn't unfeel the sting of their disappointment, as they made it clear my success was only valued in terms of how much I could give away. I had walked into that night hopeful, with roasted vegetables and a bottle of sparkling cider, I walked out feeling like I had committed some great betrayal for daring to want something for myself. I tried to brush it off in the days that followed, telling myself families fight, emotions get heated, people say things they don't mean. But the silence that settled afterward was louder than any argument. My parents didn't call to apologize. Grayson didn't reach out to clarify. I was left stewing in a storm of guilt and disbelief, wondering if maybe, just maybe, I had been selfish after all. But every time I revisited that night in my mind, the facts remained the same. I had worked for this house. Every tile, every creaky floorboard, every slightly lopsided cabinet was mine because I had earned it. I hadn't inherited it. I hadn't lucked into it. I hadn't married into it. I had built it. Choice by choice. Sacrifice by sacrifice. Still, that old reflex, the one my parents had conditioned into me since childhood, kicked in. I found myself texting my mom a few days later. "I'm sorry things got heated. Can we talk about this calmly?" She replied hours later with 5 words that punched me in the gut. "We need time to process." Process? What exactly were they processing that I hadn't handed over my house keys to Grayson? That I hadn't invited them to make decisions about the thing I had spent years building on my own? I called twice after that. Mom answered both times, but the conversations were clipped, distant. When I asked about Dad, she said he was still upset. Grayson didn't answer at all. Instead, he took to Instagram, posting vague, passive-aggressive quotes about betrayal, family, and people who smile in your face but stab your back. He didn't mention my name, but the timing was obvious. Every subtweet felt like a slap in the face. I threw myself into work to escape the emotional mess. I stayed late at the clinic, took extra appointments, scrubbed exam rooms that weren't even mine. But the emotional toll was seeping into everything. I was snippy with clients. I cried in the supply closet more than once. I stopped sleeping. I couldn't shake the anxiety that clung to me like a second skin. Then, a week after my last call to Mom, it arrived, the letter. It came in a plain white envelope buried between grocery coupons and utility bills. The return address had the name of a law firm I didn't recognize. I opened it casually at first, assuming it was junk mail, but when I saw the words, "Notice of Civil Complaint," and plaintiffs, Harold and Elaine Moore, my hands started shaking. I read the letter 3 times before the meaning truly registered. My parents were suing me. Over my house. The complaint cited an implied verbal agreement that I would provide housing for my brother Grayson, and claimed that any financial help they'd given me throughout my adult life had been with the mutual understanding that it would eventually contribute to a shared family asset. The asset, apparently, being my house. My house that they had never contributed a cent toward. My house that I had purchased, insured, and was currently paying for alone. I stared at the paper in disbelief. This wasn't just about an argument anymore. This wasn't just a family misunderstanding or a miscommunication born from stress and emotion. This was a legal attack, with signatures, timelines, and demands. They weren't just angry. They wanted to take something from me, something tangible, something sacred, my sanctuary, my reward, my hard-earned freedom. That night I had my first full-blown anxiety attack. It started with a racing heart and a tight chest. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred. My fingers went numb, and for several terrifying minutes I was convinced I was dying. I curled up on the bathroom floor, tears streaming down my face, gasping for air while my golden retriever puppy, whom I'd just adopted a few weeks prior, pawed at me through the half-closed door. After 20 agonizing minutes, the wave passed, but the fear didn't. I lay on the cold tile, trembling, asking myself, how did we get here? The next day I tried to go to work like normal, but I nearly gave the wrong medication to a dog recovering from surgery. My colleague Carla gently pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay. I broke down and told her everything: the dinner, the accusations, the lawsuit. She didn't gasp or pity me. She just listened, her brow furrowed with concern and quiet rage. "You need a lawyer," she said simply. "My sister went through something similar during her divorce. Her attorney was a pit bull in heels. You need someone like that." By that afternoon, I had an appointment with Lisa Bryce, a family law attorney with a reputation for being both sharp and compassionate. Her office was in a converted craftsman house just a few blocks from mine, a strange, poetic detail I couldn't ignore. Lisa reviewed the letter, the complaint, and the texts I had exchanged with my parents and brother. After 30 minutes of scanning paperwork, she looked up and said, "Let me be clear, this case is garbage. Legally, it's baseless. But that doesn't mean we can ignore it. We have to respond, and we have to do it smart." She explained that verbal agreements over property are nearly impossible to enforce without documentation, especially between family members. Gifts are presumed to be gifts, unless stated otherwise in writing. Still, I'd need to prove everything. My down payments, the timeline of my purchase, and any evidence that contradicted their story. Lisa's calm confidence steadied me, but the reality remained brutal. I was going to court. Against my own family. That week was a blur of document gathering, tearful journaling, and frozen meals I barely touched. Lisa filed a formal answer denying all claims and began preparing for discovery, a phase where both parties exchange information and evidence. Meanwhile, I received another text from my mom. "You left us no choice. We tried to reason with you." As if suing me was the reasonable route, through discovery, Lisa uncovered a trail of texts between my parents and Grayson that made my stomach churn. In one, my mother wrote, "Delaney mentioned she's house hunting. We need to talk to her before she buys anything." My father replied, "She knows what's expected. We've supported her. It's time she supports him." Another message from Grayson read, "Don't worry. Once she signs the papers, she'll cave. She always does." It wasn't just betrayal, it was premeditated. But the most shocking revelation came when Lisa found a financial trail. 3 months prior, my parents had refinanced their home and withdrawn $50,000 in equity. $30,000 of that had been transferred directly to Grayson. Public records showed he had maxed out multiple credit cards and had recently defaulted on a payday loan. His finances were crumbling. His need for housing wasn't about family, it was about survival, and I was the safety net he expected to land on. Lisa stared at me across her desk. "They're using the legal system to cover up a personal failure. They're making you responsible for his collapse." I nodded, numb. "I know," I whispered. "And they're doing it with smiles and birthday cards and lemon bars." Ugh. By the time the court scheduled our first hearing, I had stopped asking myself if I had overreacted. I had stopped hoping for a heartfelt phone call or a surprise apology. Something inside me had snapped not out of anger but out of clarity. This wasn't about fairness. It wasn't even about Grayson anymore. It was about control. And I was finally done giving it away. The first time I stepped into the courthouse, it felt like walking into another dimension, one where logic was replaced by legalese, and familial betrayal wore pressed suits and polite smiles. It didn't feel real that the two people who once clapped for me at my middle school spelling bee were now sitting across a courtroom, flanked by a slick attorney and a son they'd turned into a plaintiff. But there they were, my parents, Harold and Elaine Moore, with Grayson beside them, dressed in a navy blazer he'd probably borrowed, feigning wounded dignity like a theater student at callbacks. I had Lisa, my lawyer, who carried herself with a calm intensity that made me feel both safe and slightly terrified. I needed that. Because inside, I was shaking. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Catherine Holmes, had a face that belonged to someone who'd seen it all and no longer had patience for melodrama. She reviewed the filings with a furrowed brow that deepened with every paragraph. "Let me get this straight," she said finally, peering at my parents' attorney, Mr. Garrison. "You're claiming there was a verbal family agreement that the defendant would co-own a property with her brother?" "Yes, Your Honor," he said, standing with the confidence of someone who'd done this many times. "There's a long-standing history in the Moore household of shared resources, mutual familial support, and implied commitments." "Implied commitments," Judge Holmes repeated, voice dry. "So, new documentation, new written promises. Just expectation?" "Correct, Your Honor. We contend that Miss Moore's financial stability was built in part through her family's support, and thus, when she acquired the property, There was an unspoken understanding it would benefit both siblings. Lisa stood, her face impassive. Your Honor, we intend to demonstrate that not only was there no such understanding, but the support the plaintiffs reference amounts to birthday gifts, occasional help with car repairs, and one $700 loan that was repaid in full within days. We also have text message evidence that suggests this lawsuit was not born from misunderstanding, but from a coordinated effort to coerce my client into surrendering her property. The judge raised an eyebrow but said nothing yet. Instead, she ordered a round of court-mandated mediation before any further hearings. Family court doesn't exist to untangle resentment, she warned. Try to work this out before we go to trial. Mediation was held in a dimly lit conference room in the courthouse basement. The mediator, Mr. Phillips, was a former judge with a tired smile and a quiet voice. We're here to find common ground, he said, looking from me to my parents, then to Grayson. What outcome would be acceptable to each party? My father spoke first. We believe Delaney should amend the deed to include Grayson as co-owner. Alternatively, she could sell the house and divide the proceeds, so both children have equal footing moving forward. I nearly laughed. You're asking me to either give away half my house or lose money selling it, all to fix a problem I didn't create? We're asking you to be fair, my mother chimed in. Grayson's been struggling and you've always had a head start. A head start? I wanted to scream. What head start? The years of missed vacations, sleepless nights, skipped dinners, and endless hours at the clinic? The budgeting apps and grocery store coupons? The second-hand furniture and rusted-out car I drove for 9 years? That wasn't a head start. That was grit. Discipline. Sacrifice. The mediator turned to me. Miss Moore, is there any compromise you'd consider? I took a breath, struggling to stay composed. I'm willing to help Grayson with first and last month's rent on an apartment. But I will not give him ownership of my home. I paid for it. I maintain it. I live in it. Alone. Grayson's face twisted with disgust. Wow. You'd really let your own brother flounder while you sit on a whole house by yourself. You're 28, I snapped, the edge breaking through. You've never held a job longer than 6 months. You've quit everything you've started. And now you think you're entitled to what I've built? You're so smug, he hissed. Just because you live by checklists and rules doesn't mean you're better. I'm not better, I said coldly. I'm just not irresponsible. Mr. Phillips sighed, already scribbling in his notebook. I'm going to note that mediation was attempted but unsuccessful. And with that, the conference adjourned. My family left without another word. Grayson shot me one last look as he stormed out, his jaw tight, his face flushed with fury. I sat in the silence afterward, the overhead lights buzzing faintly, wondering how the people who once tucked me in at night had become strangers in suits and spite. As we moved toward trial, discovery brought everything into brutal clarity. Lisa uncovered text messages that made my stomach churn. Messages from my mother to my father that read, Delaney's house might be our only chance to get Grayson stable. Or worse, from Grayson to a friend. She hasn't said yes yet, but she's weak when it comes to family. We'll get her to cave. And the final blow, bank statements showing my parents had refinanced their home and given Grayson $30,000 just weeks before filing the suit. When Judge Holmes asked their attorney whether this transfer had been disclosed, he stumbled. It wasn't relevant, he argued weakly. The judge was unmoved. You sued your daughter claiming lack of support for your son, but gave that same son $30,000 to cover debts you didn't reveal? How is that not relevant? Then Lisa dropped the final piece of the puzzle. Grayson's credit report, filled with delinquent accounts, high-interest personal loans, and credit card statements showing gambling site charges. She laid out the pattern clearly. This lawsuit wasn't about fairness or shared family values. It was about desperation and entitlement and manipulation. During the final hearing, Lisa called me to testify. I sat straight in my chair, heart pounding, and told my truth. I described the years of scrimping and saving, the sacrifices, the discipline. I recounted the night of that family dinner, how quickly it shifted from celebration to confrontation. I spoke of the anxiety attacks, the sleepless nights, the cold silence from the people I loved most. I told the court I didn't hate my family. I just wanted to be allowed to own something without being punished for it. The courtroom was quiet when I finished. My mother looked down, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. My father's mouth was a tight line. Grayson wouldn't meet my eyes. Then the judge ruled. "This court finds no legal basis for the plaintiff's claims," she said, her voice firm. "There is no evidence written, verbal, or implied that the defendant entered into an agreement to co-own property or provide housing for her brother. Furthermore, evidence presented suggests an attempt to use the legal system to extract property under emotional duress." She paused before continuing. "The defendant's request for reimbursement of legal fees is granted." It was over. They lost, and I technically won. But as I sat in the courtroom, staring at the polished wood table between us, I didn't feel like a winner. I felt hollow, like something had been excised, like a part of me had died quietly somewhere between the first court filing and the judge's gavel. Family wasn't supposed to be something you defended yourself against in front of strangers. Afterward, Lisa turned to me, smiling gently. "You did it," she said. "You stood your ground." I nodded, numb. "Yeah," I whispered. But what did I lose to keep it? Because even though the deed still had my name on it, and only mine, nothing would ever be the same again. Not with Grayson, not with my parents, not with the people who raised me to believe that love and duty were one and the same. Now, I knew better. Now, I knew that sometimes the cost of peace is distance. And sometimes the only way to save yourself is to walk away from the people who refuse to see you as anything more than a safety net. In the weeks that followed the judge's ruling, I tried to return to normal, but normal had been shattered. The lawsuit was over. The house was mine. My name remained solely on the deed, and the court had ordered my parents to reimburse my legal expenses, which they did silently, via a check mailed to Lisa's office with no note, no apology. But if I had imagined that closure would bring relief, I was mistaken. There was no celebration, no joyful exhale, just a hollow ache that settled into my chest, a quiet realization that something fundamental had broken. My family, once imperfect but familiar, now felt like strangers cloaked in shame and silence. The emotional toll didn't vanish when the case closed. It lingered heavy and invisible, like humidity before a storm. I couldn't sleep. I stopped cooking. The sight of my own kitchen where we had shared that fateful dinner made me nauseous. Every corner of my house reminded me not just of what I'd fought for, but what I had to defend it from. I kept the blinds closed. I let the mail pile up. I ignored texts from friends asking if I wanted to get drinks or catch a movie. What was there to celebrate? I had won, yes, but the victory felt like a funeral. Work became my only refuge. The clinic buzzed with the usual chaos: emergency C-sections, aging retrievers with arthritic hips, cats who hated everyone and everything. For a while, the distraction helped. I threw myself into back-to-back appointments, working through lunch breaks, volunteering to cover weekends. But eventually, the cracks showed. I snapped at Carla for misplacing a chart. I forgot to order vaccinations. I showed up late to a surgical consult and burst into tears when my supervisor asked what was wrong. Jordan, our clinic director, called me into his office. "Delaney, you're one of our most dependable vets," he said gently. "But something's going on and it's starting to affect your work." I told him everything. Not the whole saga in gory detail, but enough. The lawsuit, the betrayal, the silence that followed. He didn't judge. He just listened. And then he did something I hadn't expected. He offered me time. "Take a week," he said. "You've earned it. Get some air. Let yourself breathe." I nodded, grateful but ashamed that I'd let my pain bleed into my work. During that week off, I tried to reconnect with the life I'd built before everything exploded. I started with the small things. I washed the sheets. I opened the windows. I returned the borrowed folding table to Carla. I sat on the porch swing I'd bought as a housewarming gift to myself and let the breeze brush against my skin. I planted marigolds in the backyard. I turned on music while I scrubbed the kitchen floor, not because it needed it, but because I needed the movement, the rhythm, the sense of control. And slowly, I began reclaiming my space, not just physically, but emotionally. I reminded myself why I bought this house in the first place. It wasn't to impress anyone. It wasn't to fulfill anyone else's vision of adulthood. It was for me to have a sanctuary, a place where I didn't need to explain myself or apologize for wanting something of my own. This house was mine, not just because of the mortgage, but because of the meaning I had poured into it. And I refused to let the lawsuit take that away. Then came the unexpected. My father showed up at my door. It was a Saturday morning. I was repotting a fern in the living room, my fingers caked with soil, when the doorbell rang. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I peeked through the window and saw him standing there, slumped shoulders, hands in his pockets, no mother or Grayson in sight, I didn't move for a full 30 seconds. Then, cautiously, I opened the door. "Hi," he said. His voice was quieter than I remembered. Older. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside. We sat in awkward silence for a few minutes, him on the couch, me in an armchair with dirt still under my nails. Finally, he spoke. "The house looks nice. You've done good work here." "Thank you," I said, my voice flat. He looked down at his hands. "Delaney, I owe you an apology." I didn't say anything. "What we did taking you to court, that was wrong. I can see that now. I think part of me saw the house and it hit me that you really didn't need us anymore. That scared me. And Grayson, he was in a bad place. He lied to us about a lot of things. We didn't know about the gambling until after the trial." I swallowed the knot in my throat. "And that makes it okay?" "No," he said quickly. "It doesn't. I'm not trying to justify it. I'm just explaining. We made a mistake. A big one. And I'm sorry." There it was. The words I thought I wanted, but they didn't land the way I imagined. They weren't a balm. They didn't undo the damage. They just hung there, like a painting tilted too far to one side. "Where's Mom?" I asked. "She's still working through it. She wants to talk. But she's afraid." Afraid of what? That you'll never forgive us." I looked at him then. Really looked. He was smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but emotionally. Like the pedestal I'd unknowingly kept him on had crumbled under the weight of reality. "I don't know if I can," I said softly. "Not yet," he nodded. "That's fair." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "We paid your lawyer directly. It's the least we could do." When he left, I felt conflicted. His apology seemed genuine, but it didn't erase the months of gaslighting, manipulation, and silence. It didn't erase the way they had looked at me across that courtroom, not as their daughter, but as an adversary. A week later, my mother texted me, "Can we meet for coffee?" We met at a small cafe halfway between my house and theirs. She looked older, too. Her makeup was minimal, her hair pulled into a messy bun. She sat down and got straight to the point. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should never have gone along with that lawsuit. I should have talked to you. I should have listened." I let her talk. I let her cry. I let her explain how Grayson had forged texts to make it look like I promised to help him with housing. How he'd played on her fears. How she wanted so badly to believe he was turning things around that she ignored every red flag. I didn't interrupt. I didn't yell. I just listened. When she asked if I could ever forgive them, I told her the truth. "I don't know. This hurt me in ways I'm still trying to understand. I'll need time." She nodded. "That's fair." As we parted, she asked quietly, "Can I see the house again someday?" "When I'm ready," I said, because healing, I was learning, wasn't a switch you flipped. It was a process, a slow, uneven walk through ashes and embers, sometimes stepping on something sharp, sometimes finding warmth where you least expect it. That week, I called Natalie. We got takeout and watched trashy reality television in my living room, and for the first time in a long time, I laughed, really laughed. It felt strange and wonderful. We talked about what it meant to choose your people, to build family from the ones who show up, not the ones who share your blood. And as I lay in bed that night, Chance curled at my feet, I looked around the room, the soft green walls I'd painted myself, the new curtains I'd just hung, the books on my shelves, and felt something shift. The house was starting to feel like home again. Not the battlefield it had become, but the dream I'd chased and caught, piece by piece. It was mine, still scarred, still healing, but finally mine again. And this time, I wasn't giving it away. 6 months after the trial, I hosted my first real gathering in the house. Nothing extravagant, just a backyard barbecue with a few coworkers, neighbors, and new friends I'd made through a pottery class I started as a form of stress relief. I grilled veggie skewers and burgers on a secondhand grill I found online, served lemonade in mismatched glasses, and set out folding chairs on the grass under strings of solar lights. It was the first time the house felt fully alive, not because of the number of people, but because of the energy. Laughter bounced off the porch columns, music hummed low from a speaker in the kitchen, and Chance, my golden retriever, wagged his tail like a metronome, welcoming every guest with unrelenting joy. As the sun dipped below the trees and fireflies blinked to life, I looked around at the people sitting at my table, not family by blood, but people who had stood by me during the hardest stretch of my life, and realized something profound. This was the home I had always dreamed of. Not just a structure with walls and furniture, but a space where I could be seen, valued, and safe. That night marked a turning point. I stopped avoiding the rooms that once echoed with my parents' judgment. I painted the dining room a rich sapphire blue, replaced the worn kitchen counters with butcher block, and turned the smallest bedroom into a reading nook with a window seat overlooking the backyard. I started printing out photos, ones I'd taken myself, of hikes, dog walks, and lazy Sunday mornings, and framed them along the staircase wall. There were no family portraits, no holiday group shots, no forced smiles from birthdays past. Instead, each photo was a moment I had chosen, a memory I had created. Alone or with people who loved me without condition. With each improvement to the house came a new level of clarity. Therapy, which I had hesitated to try at first, became an essential part of my healing. Dr. Mercer, a quiet, steady woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing, helped me untangle the twisted beliefs I'd carried for years. "You were cast in the role of the responsible one," she told me during one session. "The child who didn't need attention because she was always fine. But responsibility is not the same as value. You were treated like a backup plan, not a daughter." Her words hit hard, but they also made sense. My parents hadn't celebrated my achievements because they expected them. And when I finally claimed something for myself, a home, they saw it not as a victory, but as a resource to reallocate. A tool to fix Grayson's failures. The more we unpacked, the more I understood that their behavior during the lawsuit wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was the culmination of years of misplaced priorities and emotional neglect. They had always rushed to catch Grayson when he fell, and assumed I'd never need catching. And when I didn't comply with their unspoken rules, when I asserted a boundary, they saw it as an act of war. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because I had stopped playing my assigned role. With that realization came freedom. I began setting boundaries with a clarity I'd never had before. I told my parents, in a calm but firm conversation over lunch at a neutral cafe, that if we were to continue having any kind of relationship, it would be on new terms. No financial discussions, no comparisons to Grayson, no advice unless I asked for it. "We can talk about books, movies, gardening," I said. "But my house, my money, my life, those are not up for debate." My mother blinked, clearly taken aback. My father looked like he wanted to argue but stopped himself. "You've changed," my mother murmured, almost accusingly. "No," I replied. "I've just stopped pretending I'm okay with being used." To their credit, they tried. At first, my mother slipped, asking whether I'd considered renting out the guest room or investing in something Grayson could manage. I reminded her of our agreement. She apologized. My father, surprisingly, adapted faster. He didn't ask for access. He didn't push. During one call, he said simply, "You've earned the right to make your own rules." It was the most respect I'd ever heard in his voice. As for Grayson, he remained a ghost. I didn't hear from him for nearly 2 years. I received updates through my mother, who mentioned he'd completed his treatment program and was working part-time at a community arts center. I felt relief, mostly. Relief that he was no longer actively self-destructing, but also relief that he was out of my life. Some wounds needed more than time. They needed distance. Then, one crisp Saturday morning, I ran into him at the farmer's market. I almost didn't recognize him. Gone were the flashy clothes and overgrown curls. He wore jeans, a gray hoodie, and his hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. He looked ordinary, grounded, tired, but in a human way, not the manic edge I remembered. We made eye contact as we reached for the same bunch of kale. "Oh," he said. "Hi." I hesitated. "Hi." We stood there in awkward silence for a moment, surrounded by bustling shoppers and the scent of fresh bread. "How are you?" I asked. He shrugged. "Better," he said honestly. "Working at the arts center full-time, teaching some kids' classes, admin stuff." "That's good," I replied, and I meant it. Then came the part I hadn't expected. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For everything. The lawsuit. What I said. What I did. I was in a bad place. But that doesn't make it okay. It wasn't just about the house. It was about me not wanting to admit I had failed. And blaming you was easier." I stared at him, stunned. It wasn't a perfect apology. He still framed it with bad place and excuses. But it was more ownership than I had ever heard from him. "Thank you for saying that," I said. I wasn't ready to say, "I forgive you." But I nodded, acknowledging the moment. We parted with a tentative half-smile and a vague, "Take care." I walked away feeling lighter, not because I thought we would rebuild a relationship, but because I no longer needed to carry the anger. It had served its purpose, protected me during a time I felt vulnerable, but I was strong enough now to lay it down. In the time that followed, I built a new understanding of family, one rooted not in obligation, but in mutual respect. Natalie and her husband invited me for every holiday. Carla and I had monthly movie nights. Jordan from work taught me how to grill steak properly. Mrs. Chen, my neighbor, showed me how to grow tomatoes and shared dumplings every Sunday. These people didn't expect anything from me beyond presence and kindness. They didn't measure love by sacrifice. They simply cared. Eventually, I started dating again. Slowly. Cautiously. A few coffee dates, a museum trip, a hike. Nothing serious until Daniel. A high school history teacher with kind eyes, dry humor, and a deep respect for boundaries. On our third date, I told him about the lawsuit. About my family, about the house. He didn't flinch. "That must have been awful," he said. "Thank you for trusting me with that." He never made me feel like I had to justify my independence. He didn't joke about moving in someday, or ask if the guest room was available. He just saw the house for what it was, an extension of who I was. "You built this," he said one evening, standing in the hallway looking at the photos I'd hung. "You should be proud." I was. For the first time in my life, I truly was. And though the scars remained quiet, reminders of the battle I had survived, I no longer let them define me. They were part of the story, yes, but not the end. I was writing that part now on my own terms, in my own home, surrounded by people who didn't need me to break in order to belong. A year after the trial, I took a personal day on the anniversary of my closing date. I didn't go anywhere. I didn't dress up. I didn't post about it. I just stayed home, my home. I brewed coffee in the kitchen I'd slowly renovated with my own 2 hands, sat on the window seat in my reading nook, and let the silence surround me. Not the heavy, anxious kind that used to press down on me during the lawsuit, but the quiet that comes with peace. As I moved through each room that day, touching the walls I'd painted, flipping through photo albums I'd created, watching Chance nap beneath the dining table, I realized something profound. I wasn't just occupying space anymore. I was rooted. Grounded. Safe. The house was no longer a symbol of what I had to fight for, was a reflection of who I had become. Through it all, I had learned that home isn't defined by square footage or deed titles. It isn't about shared bloodlines or meeting expectations. It's not something someone else gives you, it's something you claim, protect, and build with intention. My home had become a sanctuary not just from the world, but from the roles I had been forced to play: caretaker, fixer, backup plan. Within these walls, I had shed those identities and grown into someone who valued herself without apology. Someone who said no without guilt. Someone who knew her worth wasn't measured by how much she gave up for others. And even though the scars of betrayal hadn't disappeared, they no longer dictated my life. I had redefined family as the people who celebrated me because of who I was, not because of what I could provide. I had learned to choose relationships that didn't come with strings or hidden expectations. I had learned that boundaries weren't selfish, they were necessary. Life after the lawsuit wasn't easy, but it was real, and that made it beautiful. That night, I stood on my porch under the string lights. I'd hung myself and watched as neighbors walked their dogs and the sky turned pink behind the trees. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel bitter. I just felt whole. And in that quiet, content moment, I knew this wasn't just the house I fought to keep. It was the life I fought to live. A life filled with peace, autonomy, and the freedom to grow into the woman I was always meant to be. Not the daughter who owed. Not the sister who gave until she had nothing left. Just Delaney whole, healing, and home at last.